Hey, so an official good afternoon to everyone here today. My name is Samantha Bowers, consultant for continuing education at the State Library of Iowa, and I am joined by my fellow consultant, Scott Dermott, who will introduce himself in just a moment, I'm sure. But during these lunch with the state libraries, I always like to say thanks for spending part of your lunch hour with us. I hope that it's very tasty lunch. I hope you get to enjoy it and that after we're done, you can still snag a minute to go on a walk or run a quick errand. But these lunchtime things have been, I think they've been kind of fun. I think we've learned a lot. It's a different scheduling pace for us. But Scott, I will turn it over to you to tell us about the accreditation program and standards and accreditation.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. And I am Scott Dermott, and I manage the Accreditation and Standards Program and also the Direct State Aid Program for the State Library. And I hope to cover some introductory material for you all today. So let me get started here. So just a couple of learning objectives that I'll be talking about. So just going to get started here. The first thing I want to do today is I want to ask you all some questions, and hopefully Sam can help just kind of give me an idea of yes, no here. So
Yep.
my yes, no question, I just want to know if you have ever applied for accreditation or tier status in the past. And this is you, the attendee, not your library.
Okay. I have seen mostly yeses so far, and now I'm starting to see a couple no's. Um, yeah, there's a
Okay.
few no's, but it's leaning towards yes, I think,
Oh,
as
okay.
far as how people are chatting in.
Okay. Well, that's fine. And hopefully, uh, those of you that have done it before, this will be a refresher. And for those of you that are new, hopefully this will answer a lot of your questions. So my next question for you all is, why do we do accreditation? And when I say we, I mean the state library. So why are we doing this?
Why does the state library do accreditation? And so this is another chat in what you
Yes, and
think.
yes, please just chat in whatever answers you may have.
Is it because we really love checkboxes and forms?
That would not be my first choice. No.
Okay, okay, let's see. Tony answers keeping statistics. Kathy says, no, that's not why we do it. Um, Standards consistency across the libraries, ensure all libraries in the state offer the same standard of service. Someone else points out state law, accountability is another word. Oh, here, I like this one. If the state library is going to give us money, they need to make sure we're doing our jobs. What do you think
Oh,
of those answers, Scott?
okay. Well, those are pretty good. Actually, they also answer my next question, but
There
so
we
I did
go.
hear the legal part. So yes, this is actually mandated by state code that we do it. We as an agency use it to document kind of the level of service that all the libraries are providing statewide. And yes, we also use it to determine your funding levels. But I do want to point out that this is only mandatory for us, that it is an optional program for public libraries. So then my next question is, why do you do accreditation? And I heard some answers about providing consistent library service. So that I think that answers this question. But what else do we have? Why you, the public libraries, are doing accreditation?
Credibility is our first response
Oh,
here.
that's a good one.
I do love going into libraries and seeing the formal accreditation certificate framed on the wall. Um, for the funding and to make our library better, it raises the perception of the library in the community, state funds.
Okay. Well, those are all, I think those are all good answers. And I think mostly ones that I have. I think libraries can use it to kind of judge their own strengths and areas of improvement. And you can use it as a planning tool. for future services. Some libraries I know you can use it as a list of best practices. So even if you don't necessarily meet all the standards, it does give you a list of things to aspire to. I think, one of the important ones is that we are able to provide consistent library service throughout the state. So whether I'm walking into, I think I got these, you're either walking into Ackley or Ziering, you're going to see basically the same levels of service, at least for libraries that are of similar size. And then it also is important because it's what we use to give you direct state aid. So those are key for you. So just wanted to do a real quick overview. We have a program manual published on our website called In Service to Iowa. This was done back in 2016, and make sure you have that particular document when you're doing this. Don't use an older version like the fourth. This is actually the 6th edition. So anything older than that, you want to just discard. And having it online allows us to update it on a regular basis. And our newest update was back in May of 2022. So again, make sure that's the copy that you're using when you're applying. Our next application cycle will start in December of this year, 2023. And the due date for that will be February 29th of 2024, actually. Yeah, I have the date wrong. It's actually February 29, 2024. And you are always applying for the next 3-year cycle. So for those libraries that are showing an expiration date on either their certificate or their tier level of June 30 of 2024, you are applying in this upcoming cycle due in February of 2024. So you're applying for the next period. Normally, that is a 3-year period that you're applying for, but sometimes libraries will apply and they'll be at a lower level than they really want to be at. So you can always reapply each year if you want, if you think you can increase your level. That includes any libraries that are tier 0. They can apply each year till they get to the status they want to be at. So otherwise, once we set that status, it's good for 3 full years. And that normally runs July 1st of the first year through June 30 of the 3rd year. So our program, it has 85 standards, and those standards are broken up into tier levels labeled 1, 2, 3. We also have what we call optional standards or best practice standards, and these are all divided up into 8 sections. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what those look like. So this is a page shot from one of our sections just to show you how they're going to look. So you've got a number. Each standard has a number, and then it tells you what tier level that standard is. And then if you notice there for number 40, there is no tier level, and that's one of the optional ones. Also in the current book, you'll notice there's, for some of the standards, there'll be some red text, like you see new, changed tier, enhanced standard. Those were actually put in when we updated from the last edition. And frankly, they're not really that useful anymore. Everybody's pretty much gone through this now, probably at least twice, if not 3 times. So referring back to the old standards, we probably just need to clear that up. But for now, when you go in, you'll see those. You can pretty much disregard that. So there is an application process that we're going through. Hopefully, for those of you that have done this before, this is old hat, but for those of you that are newer, we do ask that you submit an application at least every 3 years to renew your status. Then once we get that application form, we verify everything, and we have couple different things that we use to verify. I'll show you that in a minute. Once we've verified your level, then we set your tier status based on those standards met. And then, as I said earlier, that's good for 3 years. So the verification process, we actually use quite a bit of information. This is definitely a change from previous editions where we just basically kind of took the library's word for a lot of things. We're asking for a lot of verification now, just so you know that's coming. Some of the verification we can take right out of the application form. So it's all online. When you log in to, fill out your application, there will be some standards that ask you for dates or notes, or there are several different things. So just pay attention to that stuff. We also have several standards that rely on annual survey data, and that's actually filled right in from your survey. So the survey you're working on right now, that data will be used in the upcoming application. So make sure, that's why you want to make sure that's as correct as possible. We also ask for some supporting documentation that you send in. The common things are policies and bylaws that need to be updated at least once every 3 years. Then we also ask for a planning document. There's a ADA document that we ask for. So there's a few things. We post a document on our website that show you what that documentation is. So it'll all be there on our website. And then another way we verify is Tony Blair will go through a variety of sources to double check things, like we'll use NAC, our directory, to verify like your hours open and your website and those types of things. So Tony does a lot of that for us. So next, I want to talk about tier levels. That's kind of a critical thing for the program. So I want to start off showing you, I kind of see the tier levels operating like a pyramid. So at the beginning, the bottom of that pyramid, tier 1, those are our kind of foundational things that we think all libraries should do. And with all of these tier levels, you always need to do all of the standards of the lower grouping before you can do the next group. So in this case, in order to be considered at least tier 1, you have to meet all of the 29 tier 1 standards. So then the next level up is tier 2. Those are things that are a little bit more above and beyond that you would have been doing at tier 1. And there are 12 of those. And so to be considered at least tier 2, you must do all of the tier 1s plus all of the tier 2s. So there's a total of 41 that need to be done at tier 2. Just note, if you meet all of your tier 2, but if you're missing at least one of the tier 1, then you're going to drop down to tier 0 actually. So you need to maintain those lower tier levels. Then we have tier 3, which we also call accredited. And those are kind of the above and beyond kind of standards that we don't necessarily expect all libraries to do, but we still think they're good things. And for library to be accredited, then we do expect libraries to do those particular standards. And as you can see, there's quite a few more of those. So there's only 6 tier 3, but then there's also, we have a total of 39 optional standards, and to be considered tier 3, you have to do at least 20 of those optional. So you've got the 6 that are labeled as tier 3, 20 more of optional, plus again, all the tier 2 and all the tier 1. So you need to meet all of those 67. If you were to miss, if you had everything else but missed one of the tier 2 standards, you would drop down to tier 1. And if you had everything else except for one of the tier 1 standards, then you would drop down to tier 0. So that's something to keep in mind. So total of 67 to get to tier 3 or more. I mean, a lot of libraries can actually do quite a bit more than just the 20 optional ones. The optional standards tend to be things that that are maybe new services, or we definitely don't think all libraries necessarily need to do. So we would never expect any library to do all 39 of the optional standards. So I mentioned accreditation. Again, to be considered accredited, you basically need to meet all of the standards marked tier 1, 2, and 3, and 20 of those best practice standards, at least 20. Then you also need to make sure you get your application and all the supporting documents in by the due date, which is normally February 28th. But of course, in this coming year, it's a leap year, so we get an extra day. So everybody gets a little more time to February 29th. I want to stress this because I've heard before where people will say that their library is accredited at tier 1 or tier 2, and it does not work that way. A library is either accredited or they are not. Tier 1 and tier 2 is not considered accredited, but they're still eligible for direct state aid funding. And you heard me mention a couple times, you could drop to tier 0. Tier 0 is a non-funding category. If you miss at least one of the tier 1 standards, you'd be considered tier 0 regardless of how many of the upper level standards you meet. So there's no direct state aid funding for that. Also, tier 0 libraries are not eligible to participate in open access. However, you are eligible to participate in all of our other state library services. So you can still do interlibrary loan, bridges, all those other things you can still do at tier 0. You're just not eligible for direct state aid or open access. So I often get the question, how do I determine that direct state aid? So I'm going to show you that next. I think I've got some time left here. I bet you didn't think you were going to get a bunch of math today, but that's what we've got. So the first thing we do when determining tier level is we look, or funding level, is we look at your tier level. That's the critical element. And there's a base amount for each tier level. And then there's also a per capita amount. So larger libraries will actually receive more money in this particular formula. And so those are the first two steps. And then we have two more steps. One is a 3% amount of funding from your county and contracting cities. And I'm going to show you an example here in a bit. And then there's also the percentage of available funds. Unfortunately, the state does not fund us at 100%. So we actually, we use this formula, and then we end up with a percentage of the total of what it should be. So I show you that here. So here's our example. A city with 1,000 residents receiving $10,000 in county funding in tier 3. So since they're tier 3, their base amount is $3,000. That per capita amount is $600. 3% of the county funding is $300. And so that gives us a total of $3,900. That's kind of the gross amount that we would like to give you, but unfortunately we don't have enough money to do that. So then our next step is to adjust for available funds. So we take that $3,900. The example I'm using is for this current fiscal year. We've actually already sent all those checks out, so you should actually have that now. But we had 1.1 million this year, which was about almost 35% of what we should have had based on the formula. So we take that 34.97%, multiply it by the total, and that's where we came up with that 1364. So that's the amount of money that library would receive through direct state aid. This can change year to year. The amount of funding can change. the amount of libraries participating can change. So, but this the past few years we've kind of had flat funding, so this number has been kind of the same for the last few years or close to it, anyways. So that's how we come up with that. And just a reminder that Tier 0 is you're not eligible for that direct state aid funding or open access. So the last thing I wanted to talk about here is do not be surprised. Don't wait until the last minute to do this. There are a lot of standards that are based on a 3-year cycle or a 3-year average. So for example, we have our policies and bylaws that need to be updated at least every 3 years. So you want to make sure that's done. Trustee training is something that needs to be done every year, but we look at a 3-year period for that. So you can't wait till the last minute. You have to be doing this. The written plan is something that can be done every 5 years, but if you do need to do it, you need to start on it like before now. Especially if you need help from your district consultants, that's something that can take a bit of time to do. So make sure you get on that right away. And then these other standards, like the endorsed director, you have to make sure your endorsement is up to date when you apply. This has caused problems for some directors. Adding and withdrawing materials is a 3-year average. So that needs to be done ahead of time. And the ADA accessibility checklist is something that we all need to do. Make sure you don't wait to the last minute because, for example, if you are wanting to do the outdoor checklist and it's in the middle of winter, that makes it really difficult. So you have to make sure you pick one that's more logical based on weather conditions. So this is just an example of these standards. There are others that are based on years or data that need to be collected over a series of years. So don't wait till the last minute. It also makes it more difficult for technical support from us if we're kind of scrambling 2 weeks before due date. So I just like to remind people to do that. And it looks like we have 5 minutes left. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. That is my contact information. I'm always happy to answer questions about the accreditation program. Doesn't have to be while you're applying. So Sam, I don't know if we had any questions come up.
I have not seen any questions, and you answered the one I had, which is if I'm filling this out for the first time, what do you think might trip me up? And you kind of highlighted some of those that you think
I'd
are,
say take a look at this list because that's a
yeah.
good starting point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How would you recommend, oh, and I'll answer Connie's question in a sec here, but um, do you have any sort of practices you might recommend to somebody who's maybe wants to get a better handle on this so that, the third year around or when that year 3 comes, they're not super surprised? What sorts of workflows have you seen that work well for folks? How can they be on top of this process?
Well, there's 2 things I can offer. There's actually 3 things. One is to make sure you're familiar with In Service to Iowa. I think that's really important to start ahead of time. Don't start looking at it in December. Look at it right now if you haven't. That will tell you kind of what you need to do. We also publish a couple of documents. One is a supporting documentation list that tells you what we need as far as files. So like policies, bylaws, plan, and kind of what time period they're needed for. And then we also publish a verification checklist that shows you everything that we ask for verification. So I think those are all good resources to look at. Um, I mean, this is a fairly complicated process, so I don't know about workflow. I
No, I
guess I
think
would,
staying in touch with the standards is definitely
yeah.
a good one. Um, Here's a question that came through. I'm a small library that doesn't meet ADA requirements.
Oh.
Can I still qualify for tier one?
That's a good question. We used to ask libraries to submit photos and that kind of stuff to show that they meet certain ADA requirements. We do not do that anymore because we can't verify any of that, and we can't say that a library is ADA compliant. That's out of our jurisdiction. So the ADA standard that we have now is basically a checklist that libraries can use to review their building to spot any trouble spots. And that's all we ask you to do is fill out this checklist.
So go through
Uh,
the checklist. So you might complete the checklist and realize I'm not meeting X, Y, and Z on the checklist, but having done the checklist in and of itself is enough to help you meet this standard for accreditation.
right. All we ask for in that case is the checklist. Whether or
Okay.
not, you may identify problems, but whether or not you fix them are totally up to you. We do not come in, give you a call and say, hey, you need to fix your door or whatever. That is not what we do. We just say, look at the checklist, identify your problems, and then use that to help fix them.
Okay. One more sort of practical question, and then one impractical. I like this. So
Okay.
supporting documents, do those come through email to Tony, or how are those done through the form? How are those handled?
Supporting documents are now can be uploaded. We have a service where you can just upload them directly. They do good at Tony. We'll also take email, but uh, uh, the upload service is the way to go. Actually, if you need something other than that, then you should contact Tony directly. But it's
Great.
pretty straightforward
Yeah.
to do that type.
Um, and the survey will go out early December, is that right?
The application goes out usually the first or second week of December.
Okay, for a
And
completion before the end of February.
yes, and
Awesome.
we always send out to all the libraries that need to apply, we'll send out email messages to the directors to let them
Okay.
know when it's ready.
All right, this will be our last question. I'm a newer director. How worried should I be if there is very little record of some of these standards?
I guess it depends on what they are. And I would suggest that you contact me directly about that and we can work through it. Depends on
Okay.
what you're missing.
All right. We have one more question here. I said the last one was going to be the
Okay.
last one.
Okay.
An annual report was not submitted, and the annual report different than the accreditation survey, correct?
Oh, definitely. Yes.
All right. So, Susie, I think maybe I'll have you touch base with Scott directly on your question there about reporting. That seems a little bit in depth to get into right here, but we are at time. I always appreciate these flyby overviews. If you're watching the recording, you can always feel free to get in touch with Scott as well as we go through this process. But thanks everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your lunch. Get outside, go on a little walk if you can. And we will post these slides to Iowa Learns as well. So take care, everyone. Thank you, Scott. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you.